Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the mental health webinar series here at SANE. I'm coming to you from Melbourne, and I'll do an acknowledgement of country. I might change my name. My name is Anu, and I'm the manager of lived experience and peer work here at SANE. And I'm joined by Alice here as well, who
Hello.
I'll get to introduce you shortly. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we're all meeting from and joining from. We've got lots of people from around the nation joining this webinar today. So I'd like to acknowledge all the different lands that we're all joining from and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. And would like to also extend the warm welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I'm joining you from the lands of Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm, Melbourne, and would like to acknowledge the wonderful land, sea and airs that we all come from and are meeting on. Sovereignty was never ceded and never will. And I'll give hand over to Alice, who might do a short introduction. But before I do, I'll hand over to Jinx to introduce themselves first. So Jinx, would you introduce yourself, please?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I am Jinx. I am a community builder on the SANE Forums. Some of you may have already seen me around on there.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Jinx. And Alice, welcome today.
Hey Anu, I'm Alice. I'm a peer ambassador for SANE. Super happy to be here with you all tonight. I'm joining from the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation as well, by the way. So that's Sydney.
Oh, amazing. Um, Today, your mum has written a book, Sarah Martin,
She has.
around your journey. But I'm really keen to sit down with you today because you've had your journey, and could you share a little bit about yourself and who you are, where do you come from, what it's all been like so far?
So I think I'll just go back to the beginning maybe. I
Yeah.
lived a pretty sheltered upbringing, very privileged Sydney sider. I spent a bit of my youth in Melbourne, and one of my earliest memories, of course, involves dogs and Christmas, and also riding on the train to the MCG to watch the footy. So my family are big footy heads and they go for Collingwood. But when I was a kid, I really wanted to go for the Bulldogs. So I took that as a sign to sort of not engage with AFL very much because I wasn't allowed to go for the cute little Bulldogs. And yeah, I kept a diary from an early age. And at the end of primary school, some of those thoughts were really dark. And when I got into high school, I had this really close relationship with my mum, and I still do. I had decisions to make, right? So I often debriefed with her, and I chose to leave my primary school friends in high school to be with different girls. And that was a huge decision, but it sort of like molded all these other decisions. And yeah, anyway, in high school, I realized something was not quite right internally and I sought help, but it was expensive and I was really high functioning. So it was sort of like brushed aside, I guess. Like I didn't really vibe with my therapist either, who was a recommendation from my best friend. So because I was so high functioning and my depression had gone relatively unnoticed, I sort of stopped going to therapy, although I had withdrawn from all these activities like competitive swimming, netball, athletics and music. I played tenor sax and soprano sax, and on one occasion
Mm.
I played the cymbals in the marching band. because
Oh,
I just had
wow.
my tonsils taken out, so I couldn't join like I normally would. Yeah, that's a bit about
And
my childhood.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Recovery, you mentioned about depression and mentioned high functioning, there's this misconception in society that, you have people with mental health look a certain way. And as we know, mental health doesn't discriminate. Some people are high functioning, they can be leading, quite um, significant lives. And also, people with mental health are very good at masking our behaviors and masking our symptoms. Like, I know I live with my mental health condition and I mask it, and we sort of, I guess, uh, minimize what our experience and sort of go, oh, I don't need to see or seek help. What was that journey like? Because you mentioned that when you were sharing just before that you were high functioning, you had a psychologist, but you sort of you felt that you didn't need to continue that. Could you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that
sure.
experience and masking and what that's like for you?
Yeah, so I probably the first time I was really masking was after a high school exchange program to Italy. So I went
Mm,
there. No one spoke any English. They didn't want to. Like, I was just
mm,
this novelty, this Aussie girl who couldn't speak any Italian, and no one really cared to speak English to me. They just refused. So the first month and a half was really hard for me, and I took it all out into my diary, like wrote every day these big rants about no one wanting to talk to me. But when I came back, I felt really alone. Like it
mm,
had been 3 months away and 3 months of struggle until the last month when I actually could speak Italian pretty well. And then I had all these great connections all of a sudden with these Italian people and the language itself sounding so beautiful, being a musical person. So I came back and I just felt really sad. My relationship with my brother, my little brother, 8 years difference, um, was just not as good anymore. I used to read him books and I stopped. And then I would just pretend like everything's okay, really repressing my thoughts and feelings. And I started developing really unhealthy coping mechanisms. Like
mm,
even before I went away to Italy, I had been smoking weed and I smoked weed
mm,
before I smoked a cigarette in Italy. Um,
mm.
and I just, yeah, developed these unhealthy coping mechanisms and my emotional regulation really suffered. Yeah.
Yeah. It can be challenging, right? And um, we sort of resort to things in the moment that we think are useful for us, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's alcohol and other drugs. It's not healthy, but it helps us in the moment. It can be challenging navigating through all of that on top of you know, any diagnosis that you've had, any challenges that you've had. How do you manage all of that? How did you navigate that, going through both?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's a lesson to be learned in my story in that early intervention is super important.
Mm,
And my journey changed from high functioning depression, like anhedonia, like my pulling out of the swimming and the things I used to enjoy. It changed to something else. And it started off great. Like I had this extreme sense of focus when I was finishing my last semester of my first degree. And I was so focused. I was doing my last little project and I put curtains up in the like sheets up on the wall in the study because there were no curtains. And I had big A3 printouts and I just went crazy with the post-its. And I
wow.
ended up writing all about AI. And this was in 2015. I actually found it
Wow.
like yesterday. And
Wow.
yeah, I went looking through my UTS emails to find a copy of it. And I was talking about media theory and stuff like that. And the only comment the lecturer wrote was, I hope you find something interesting to engage you in life.
Wow.
And she only gave me a distinction, and I was baffled. I'm like, why would you leave me this comment and not comment on my
Yes.
work? So it started off really well. I was super focused, and then I got really anxious. Um, I was at a party with my best friend. Yes, I had smoked some weed, I confess, but I'd never gotten anxiety from it before. And
Mm,
I thought, okay, wow, this is interesting. Um, but I just sort of ignored it. And the person at the party told me, the person at the party, my friend at the party, he told me to look around. What 5 things do you see? What 4 things can you hear? And he
mm,
took me through this list of things and grounding exercise. And I wish I sort of realized that something was wrong, like a bit different, but nothing was going to stop me from traveling overseas because I thought this was my
mm,
opportunity to break free from the mild depression I'd been suffering my whole life. This was my trip to Europe. I was going there with my brother, his now wife, and
mm.
our friend Mika. And yeah, we ended up buying a Ford Mondeo in Madrid, and we drove it from Madrid all the way along the coast
Wow.
into Bulgaria, so just above Turkey. I'm still not used to
Wow.
saying the name of that country as they have changed it, Turkey. Yeah, so it was a really fun trip, but there were moments that were I was markedly elevated, and like one moment I was in Barcelona and it was amazing. There were so many people on
Mm,
the streets. I don't know if anyone has been over there when someone's won the football cup and the streets over there just go wild. There were
mm.
fireworks, everything was going off, and then all of a sudden I hear this bongo drum starts up and I'm like, oh
Ah,
no, this is so good. I have to find the source of the music. And I go
yes.
over and I meet this guy called Abraham, and he's from a country in Western South Western Africa. And he ended up becoming really important to me because all of a sudden his friends were over and in this circle, and I thought they had telepathically connected. Because all of a
Ah,
sudden his friends emerged out of nowhere, and that was weird. That was unusual. So I could have talked to my friends about that and my brother and the people I was with at the
mm,
time, but because I didn't have that sort of connection, where I
mm,
let people into how I was feeling, I didn't have
mm.
that. I couldn't admit to myself that this was different, this was unusual. This was
Yes.
actually a prodromal, like a pre symptom to what
Yeah.
happened later.
Can I stop you there? When you say prodromal, I mean, that's a clinical term, right? And
It
if you've
is.
been diagnosed with something, you go, oh, I know what that means now. But to some of our audiences and some of us who may not know what that means, do you mind touching on it from your lived experience and what you understand and what that looks like for you?
Yeah, so a prodromal symptom is one that you can only really put your finger on it in hindsight. So it might be like talking
Yes.
too much, or, me having this feeling that people have telepathic thoughts, or,
Mm.
yeah.
Okay, thanks for delving into that. Now, I just want to let the audience know that there is at the bottom of your screen in Zoom, depending on whether you're using a mobile or a computer, it might be different. There is a Q&A function, so feel free to put questions through or through the chat function, and we'll get to it towards the end as well. We'll spend a bit of time and we'll go through as many questions as we can in the time that we have. But I really want to. You mentioned depression, but we've spoken to each other, Alice, before. But if you don't mind sharing, you have a different diagnosis. Is that right to depression?
Yes. So there was me in Barcelona feeling quite elevated, and then there's also me a few weeks later in Istanbul feeling manic with psychotic features. And then 2 years later, there's another episode of me without any use of drugs for 2 years, recreationally. An episode of me experiencing mania with psychosis again. So I have a diagnosis of bipolar affective disorder, bipolar type 1, and mostly that is managed through medication, and I take my medication regularly. I monitor my sleep diligently, and I if I have little bouts of depression, I try to get a hold on it as soon as possible. So like I said, the early intervention is like super key for me. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And the only reason I wanted to touch on that is diagnosis can be helpful and unhelpful. I don't know from your perspective whether that was. I know from my journey, a diagnosis brought clarity for me personally, and it's not the same for everyone. For some people, it can conjure up different feelings because, again, I have a braceless charm of the different diagnoses I've been given over the years.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you? Was it helpful for you getting a formal diagnosis, or was it not helpful?
Mixed feelings. Initially, I really hated the name bipolar. I really wanted it to be called manic depression. I felt like that was more me. That was more the brutal high and the depression low. Like it's not a colloquial word like moody. It's not that. So I don't
It's
know.
different, right? Often, what gets portrayed in the media about bipolar is like it's a hourly or daily mood swing. But as you probably know, and the reality is it's actually can be quite different and can be quite slow between the different moods. What was the experience of you getting help? What was some people, for them, it's amazing. You go
Yeah.
see the first psychologist, tick, you connect with them. You see the first psychiatrist, tick, you get prescribed a particular medication, it works. That's a utopian world. It's not always the case. I know I was lucky enough to have those moments of good things happen, but I'd also know there are a lot of people out there who struggle, who who've seen multiple psychologists to form that bond. The medications haven't quite worked the first
Yeah.
time round. It needed a lot of tweaking. I mean, for me, the medications did need tweaking as well. What was that like for you? What was that journey like for you?
So before Istanbul, before my first psychosis, it was really hard. I'd seen 3 counselors or psychologists, and I felt like the first one was hypnotherapy, not a match. I would just sleep. The second one was CBT. I didn't like the homework. It wasn't a match. I can't even remember the third one. But then in my acute phase where I was really experiencing symptoms of psychosis, I met a psychiatrist, and I was super lucky. I'm like one of those lucky ones where the first psychosis. In the second hospital though I went to, it was a match for me. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to hear. Because for me, it was, yeah, whilst it was easy to find the psychologist and connect with the psychologist, it took a bit of tweaking in terms of finding the match in terms of therapy. Um, I don't know where this strength came from because I'm usually quite soft-spoken, but I managed to say, hey, CBT is not actually working for me. But I do know that often in that relationship with your therapist and with your psychologist, you sort of just, and I know I did the same. I sort of like, well, they're the expert, they know everything. But with
Yeah.
mental health, it's slightly different because they actually don't know completely. They don't have an X-ray into your feelings. They can't do a CT scan of your feelings. So they rely very heavily on us sharing, and that requires an incredible amount of trust and rapport. So it takes a bit of courage it takes a bit of courage to sort of go, hey, I'm struggling with CBT, or to advocate like a particular therapy is not working.
Exactly.
Um,
We don't know we can
how,
do that as well. Like,
no, it wasn't
yeah.
something that somebody tells us that, you know, you go to a psychologist, you can actually say something's not working, can you try something different? Um, but what was that journey like? Did that come naturally to you, or did that take a little bit of, I guess, trial and error for you to go, hey, something's not quite right, I need to speak up in therapy?
No, definitely trial and error and more flaking than
Yes.
anything else. Yeah, so I don't know. I think now I would understand that I could do that, and I have a good working relationship with my therapist where I do have the ability to say, hey, um, I this worked well for me, this I didn't really like this, or um yeah, and I'm a tough client, I reckon. So I reckon, just being honest and open about the relationship as you're in it
Yeah.
is super interesting and very helpful.
100%. I think we forget sometimes that unless it's a bulk build or you're in a public health system, our money is, we're paying for that service. So I think of my mental health. I mean, it's like I would rather go to someone and check for their expertise and do a bit of vetting. But I only know that now. In the moment, you go to
Mm,
your GP. The GP gives you the first referral to the psychologist, and you go, okay, yep. But now looking back, I would be asking more questions and, before even booking the first appointment, asking the reception, hey, do they specialize? Like I live with OCD. Do they specialize in OCD?
yeah.
What experience? How many clients have they actually seen? Um, I didn't know that, and that's hindsight. Like, I just blindly went to the first psychologist, and luckily they turned out fine, but a lot of people, that first psychologist that they see doesn't turn out to be okay,
I
and
know.
they don't know that, you can actually have that conversation beforehand.
Yeah.
Um, Coming back to where, you mentioned psychosis. I've heard different experiences from people. I've got mates who've experienced that, and for some people, it was a really wonderful experience. For
Mm,
others, it was a hugely traumatic experience, and they don't want to experience that again.
yeah.
Help me understand, where were you? Where do you lie in that spectrum?
I have both worlds. So I experience extreme highs and it's great. I'm talking to
Mm,
dolphins. I've got my feet in the water in Bali
mm,
and I put my hand in the water. The dolphins jump out at the same time. I'm in sync. And then next minute they're gone. And the last word they said to me was plastic. And then everything just gets really dark and it continues to be dark. And I'm in all
mm.
sorts of bad delusions about things out to get me. And oh, yeah, so it's fun before it gets really scary and, yeah, I have heard mixed things as well. Um, but for me, the scariness outweighs the highs of mania. Mm.
Yeah, I know. And you work very closely, or you and your mum are sort of, for me, are like have worked together. What was that dynamic like for you? Um, for some people, family are incredibly helpful and useful. I know for me, my family was incredibly helpful and supportive as part of my recovery journey, but I know that it's not that for everyone. What was that dynamic like for you?
Yeah. So it wasn't perfect. Like mum had these ideas she wanted to get, which is great, might work for other people, but she wanted me to wear a wristband of different colors and like to represent how I was feeling that day, which is a great
Mhm,
idea for some. But for me, it was just not a great idea. I thought, ask me an
mm,
open question, mum. So we've been working a
mm,
lot on open questions throughout these years and making sure they're not yes no questions. Like at some point in time, the yes no questions would have been great as well. Like when I was really acutely unwell, do you want to hold my hand? Yes, which is so weird. I think
mm,
when I was really sick, I would hold mum's hand and we were walking around in Istanbul and I would just
mm,
clutch at her hand, which is so weird for
mm,
me because you wouldn't catch me doing that in a baseline state. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But was that useful in that moment, in that acute moment?
Absolutely. And she was willing to hold my
Mm,
hand. So I am so grateful for that.
mm.
Yeah.
Was in that moment, and you may or may not be able to answer it, and feel free not to answer any of my questions, but I know when I'm in an acute state, there are things that are very individual to me that either help me or don't help me. And it'll be different for different people, so that we can't sort of do a blanket thing that every person who's experiencing an acute psychotic episode, they're
Yeah.
going to experience the similar things that are going to help them. But for you personally, when you were in the moment where that reality gets blurred, what were some things in that moment that really helped you? I think you
Mm.
touched on it, yes or no questions.
Yes.
What were other things that
Okay,
in that
so
moment that helped you?
my older brother was also there in Istanbul, which was great because mum is a terrible traveler and I was wanting to go do a Circe, like a tone on the streets naked and run away. And he gave me headphones and I put them on and he said, okay, it's one touch, pause, two touches, skip, like the song. But I took
Ah,
it as pause thoughts or next thoughts,
ah,
skip the thoughts.
right.
And that was so helpful. So music was super helpful. I could sort of get some reprise from the auditory hallucinations because I was hearing so many
Mm,
voices. And Istanbul's really loud, so lots of external noise to rewire in my brain and lots of stimulation. Um, so the music was really helpful. Another thing that helped me was, yeah, someone mentioned in the chat animals. And when I came back home, definitely the animals around me, the cats. When
mm,
I was coming out of hospital, I was being weaned off a lot of medication.
mm-hmm,
And it was horrible. I would wake up in the middle of the night with night terrors, and my cats had
mm,
never been a cuddly cat.
ah,
Rumi, bless him, he
mm,
would come over out of nowhere and jump up next to me and just start purring as I'd be
aw,
waking up like, and the cat would just
wow.
come over. And ever since then, he's been very cuddly, so it's done him some good.
Yeah, he's learnt
Yeah.
through the hardship,
Yeah, we can
unfortunately.
co-regulate.
Yeah, and animals are so healing. So would you say grounding and just staying in touch with, like animals, feeling the fur, music is sort of
Yeah.
helps as well, like sound. Um, what about like simple things like sleep and nutrition? What was that like through this process? Because I know when I'm unwell, and I'm
Mm.
guilty of this, I forget eating. I don't sleep very well. Um, what's that like for you?
Yeah, when I'm unwell, I'm not sleeping well at all, and I'm probably eating an onion with cumin, which is what I did in Istanbul, just a raw
Mm,
onion with some cumin. Um, so when I'm well, I like to monitor my sleep all the time. I'm really vigilant on that. I wear a sleep watch and
mm,
it works for me to make sure I'm sleeping good quality sleep. And if I'm not, then maybe the next night I medicate myself to make sure I get a good sleep. Keeping hydrated, getting exercise, nature. The other week I was
mm,
really flat, like I thought that I would need to go to hospital. Um,
mm,
and I took some medication to just sleep it off. Woke up feeling like terrible and I got myself up, and thank God I've got a dog. I've got a 2-year-old Dalmatian and I just knew that I had to take a day off work. I had to go take her to the dog beach, and I just felt super lucky that I could do that because I know it's not so easy for other people in their situations to just take time off work. But I was so unwell and I took myself to the nature.
mm,
And then the next day, I don't work Fridays. So I took myself to the Blue Mountains with the dog and I really forced myself into this nature therapy. And yeah, that was just amazing. I pulled myself out of it. Yeah, very quickly. I was in a dark place before that.
Yeah, and in terms of like nature can be so useful. For me personally, grounding, and just sometimes even if I can't go into, the Daintree rainforest, for example, like that's not ideal of what nature is, like being in the Daintree rainforest. But what I can do sometimes is just going to my backyard and removing my socks and just walking barefoot on the
Yes.
grass. Like I find
So good.
personally that's so soothing. Um, how's your how's your side effects going? How did you have any side effects with any of your medication?
Yes, so I was on another medication before. Is it okay to say what I was on, or is that...
We might leave
Yeah,
names of
okay.
medication
Yeah,
out. Yeah.
that's fine. Yeah, I was on a medication before and it made me very thirsty and jittery and shaky, and it had effect on my thyroid. And it also sort of numbed my cognition. So for example,
Yes.
I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but after stopping this medication, my grades at uni went from like 70 to 85s.
Oh wow.
So yeah, I don't know if it's related, but my psychiatrist said it might potentially have been. Like she's pretty
Mm,
solid that it is. So yeah, that changed, and now I don't have any side effects, but it is really hard to medicate for depressive episodes, like because the risk of triggering a manic episode is so high with those antidepressants. So yeah, that's why I knew I do not want to change my medication back to that previous medication. Um, so yeah, I had to do that
yeah.
extreme nature therapy, get myself out of
Mm.
it naturally.
Yeah, yeah, it can be challenging, and that like we're not clinicians, so that's why we don't share
Yeah,
proper like medication
it's all
advice and
different for everyone anyway.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I know my side effects were very different to other people, so it can be quite challenging finding
Yeah,
the right mix because everybody's body is so different.
I know.
It can be quite challenging. I'm gonna start working through. We've got some questions coming through. I'll keep people's names anonymous. So, uh, this is a good one. Any advice on how to encourage people to take the first big step of seeking and accepting help?
Oh, that's a nice question. So, any advice? I think it would be, I really like when I have had issues in the past, and my best mate, now partner, has come up with a list of keep Alice safe plan. And just
Mm,
putting it like that, it's so simple. It's about your safety. So, what is happening now? What is the problem? Just brainstorming it together and just focusing on that safety is the number one importance, and not making it like an attack on that person, but just like, we want to keep you safe. How do we navigate this together? Um, I would also encourage bringing to light positive stories. There's so much negativity out there, and just maybe connecting with people who are um, I don't know, healed or healing in their journey, and yeah, who are open and honest, and encouraging people to be around other open and honest people. And then hopefully that keep safe plan can come around, can be worked on, even if they reject it at the start. Yeah.
great. Thank you so much for that. And the other, I'm just going to work through the questions as
Yeah,
best as
that's
we can.
fine.
This is a very interesting question, and I don't think I have any knowledge on how to answer this question. Is dynamic psychiatry valid? Any thoughts? I don't even know what
Um,
dynamic psychiatry is.
I'm not sure. Is that like
Very good
dynamic
question,
psychiatry? Yeah, good
whoever asked
question.
that.
Yeah.
I might skip that because I don't know how to
I
answer
don't know
that.
either. Please
Um,
elaborate.
yes. Now this is a controversial one. It can or cannot, but do you think your use of alcohol and other drugs like marijuana as a young person contributed to your diagnosis?
definitely sped it along.
Mm,
There's also other things that have contributed. Like I went through some trauma when I was
mm,
19, and I think that could have equally contributed to my stress tolerance and the
mm,
brain activity there. But yeah, definitely the depression started before the drug use, so it's
mm.
probably all
All
interrelated.
interlinked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be very hard to tell which one came first, right? What led to what? I know for me, childhood trauma was the leading point to getting a diagnosis of OCD, but it wasn't like a sudden onset. It was like similar to you, started with depression, anxiety, and
Yeah.
then morphed into OCD. Um, how often do you see your therapist, and what do you do when you don't have money to pay for therapy and have run out of your mental health
Mm,
care plan? That's a
yes.
good question.
That is a great question. So I see my therapist at the moment twice a week. Um, so that's pretty frequently. Um, yeah, well, money. For me, I see a psychiatrist. So it's
Mm,
one big hit at the start of the year, until
mm,
you get over your um, Medicare cap. There's a certain level,
mm,
it's a couple $1,000s, and it's just the start of the year. And luckily, I have my parents and a great relationship with them. I always have to ask them for help at that time. Like,
yeah,
can't afford
mm,
it. Yeah.
that's fair. Um, and I know different people, my colleagues and friends, sometimes they space them out longer. I know some people, like I see my psychologist every 2 to 3 months. So those 10 sessions last a little bit longer. But again, it's different for different people. There are
Yeah.
different, it's sort of like a hard question because everyone's so different.
Yeah, it's a
And
really
that
hard
everybody
question.
we're going through with mental health is at a different stage, and sometimes they need different level of differing needs of support, I guess, at different times in their life.
Yeah.
Um, uh, uh, I'm just reading this question. Ah, is it the usual way to go first to a psychologist as opposed to a psychiatrist with psychosis, or both, or either?
Interesting.
Good question.
I think if they're your patient already, it wouldn't matter. But I don't know. I think it's normal to be in the community and be anywhere, and anyone can be a mental health first aider. So I
Mm,
really encourage everyone here to look into the mental health first aid training. It's brilliant. I know it's helped me really put into perspective what best practice is. And if you have a friend, a family member, anyone that you start thinking red flags of like symptoms, little change in behavior, to how to get them support, how to approach them, how to deal with delusions,
mm,
all the best practice ideas about that. So that's the mental health first aid course, because these people, they could be in the community, and 2% of the population, something like that, experiences bipolar, and you can
mm.
experience psychosis reactively. So through any point in your life, you could also experience psychosis, even if you don't have bipolar. So, yeah.
Great, thank you for that. And yeah, it can be very difficult to figure out. I think for me, it was seeing a psychiatrist first and then going to a psychologist. But I also know people who've seen a psychologist first and then seen a psychiatrist. So
Mm.
it really, I guess there's no, and that's what makes it tricky. There's no right or wrong in
Yeah.
this. The other one, yeah, I have. So this person has shared that they live with, and have lived with bipolar for 25 years, and they have a propensity to have an elevated mood and feel energized. When would the need be, or when would you recognize that you need to draw it back? Like in the case of psychosis, for example, I'd imagine that it can be quite difficult, like to figure out when that prodromal period is and when you're going
Yes.
but I'll let you talk to it.
Okay. So I think that the minute my sleep is affected or my
Mm,
eating, that's when I would probably be uh, looking for help or support, advice. I don't know, anything that can help you get a proper sleep, because once your sleep goes, you're at really high risk of developing mania.
mm.
Yeah, that's just me. I haven't experienced a manic episode since my diagnosis, so I've been doing something right, but also very determined to keep learning about it as well. So it's just knowing you and yeah, knowing what's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
cool. And this is the question about your sleep watch. Could you
Oh yeah.
share a little bit more about what sleep watch you use?
Okay, so I've got a Pixel, a Google, sorry, the Pixel's the phone. It's a Google watch and it has Fitbit on it and it syncs
Oh.
with my phone. So I've got a Google Pixel. That's why I use Google. It's not any brand preference. I don't mind. But I know the other watches do it too, and they connect with Fitbit and it tracks. So the deep sleep is what you want to keep an eye on.
Mm.
If I get 33 minutes, this is just an example of what happened to me the other
Yeah.
day. If I get 33 minutes deep sleep, I'm a bit worried. I
Uh-huh.
like an hour deep sleep, and that's sort of the benchmark for your age range. So it will give you the benchmarks for your age range and your health. I don't know how it calculates it. And you sort of want to be sitting in there. I generally sleep like a log. So if I'm awake more than like 4% of the night, for example, I might think, okay, that's a bit weird. Um, yeah, I'm a good sleeper most of the time. So yeah, it's just keeping an eye on it though every day.
Yeah. Um, and like you said, it works differently for different people,
Yeah.
so it's different. Um, have you experienced, have you had any experience with like helplines, like Lifeline, Beyond Blue,
Mm.
etc.? Um, what's that been like for you?
Yeah, so I have recently with one of the chat lines, I can't remember which group it was, but yeah, I thought that was a good conversation, and they directed me to a meditation app which was free. And I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciated my chat with that person. Um, so that was just a chat line, but I have called lots of hotlines before. Um, they're really good. It's worthwhile having them in your arsenal. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I know I use a lot of support lines and helplines when I'm not even in like an acute stage, just as a debrief at the end of the day, just like as a little check-in. So any of those lines can be useful depending on what you're after. Um, this is a good one. How long did it take you to accept your diagnosis condition? Because that acceptance journeys can be quite long for people. What
Mm.
was that like for you?
Yeah, I once I sort of rewired in my head that I could call it manic depression, and that term did exist before it became bipolar. I just accepted it. I really like, Jimi Hendrix, manic
Mm.
depression. Yeah, I found it much more relatable, but the fact that the rest of the society doesn't share the same viewpoint as me gives me the irrits, and that it's become a colloquial term. But yeah, once I sort of accepted that I do have this condition, I live with this condition, just like diabetes. I have to monitor it. And I've got a grandparent who is 94 years old with diabetes, so that gave me hope.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's trooping on. So yeah, not alone, very much not alone. There's a community out there. I have lots of people on Instagram who are part of the bipolar community, and yeah, it's just connecting and trying to break the stigma which is around it, which Mum and I have tried to do through our book, Dear Psychosis. Mm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Um, let me just go through the list of questions. This is a very good one. Do you feel that being aware, having knowledge of your illness and understanding of what is happening, helps you cope better as you get older?
Yeah. Knowledge and awareness definitely helps. Um, my emotional regulation, my impulsivity, my um, oh, there's a word for it. When you have intrusive thoughts, that's one thing I
Mm,
had in my recent depressive bout, that really worried me. I didn't like that, out of character, took myself straight to the GP. Um, yeah, so that was really important for me to have words to explain those things. So I think it's mostly come from just talking about it and surrounding myself with people who have similar experiences and seeking help. Um, yeah, my partner's very supportive too. So, and she's a nurse, so she has all the clinical words for up her arsenal. So I try and learn as much as I can from her and people around me who have been through things. Yeah.
yeah, and for me, it was same, like, being aware and having a knowledge, helped me become more aware of that part of me so I could work on managing it better. Not not knowing or not having any knowledge made it difficult. But again, different for different people.
Mm.
Um, let's keep going. We've got some wonderful comments coming here. Oh, in hindsight, did you see any insight? Then, did you see any signs in your childhood that this was in your future? I know I didn't, but
Um, hey, in childhood, if this was in my future, I actually have this memory, a very clear memory, but I I don't know. I had this memory that I went to Chatswood. I don't know. I went to this suburb in Sydney, and my parents took me to be analysed to see if I was on the spectrum or anything like that. But I've talked to my parents about this. Apparently, it didn't happen, but it's a very clear memory that I have. So I don't know. I think I always knew that something was there, but like my diary from when I was younger was just I was so thinking about my thinking and in my head and just curious about all the pain in the world and why the life can go on when there's all the pain, and I don't know. Yeah, there were signs that I was not able to cope with my emotions, like emotionally
mm,
regulate. Um, but I don't know if I would know early that it was bipolar. That's really hard.
no. Yeah, it's very difficult to
Yeah.
look back and go whether, yeah. Um, oh, there's a question. Sorry, I didn't mention this earlier. Are we going to hear from Alice's Unfortunately, Sarah double booked herself, so she's not going to be here with us today. She's got another appointment, so apologies for that. But we are planning together something in the future. So I won't promise anything because it will depend on her availability, but watch this space.
Yeah.
From We might hold something in the future. This is another good one. Do you socialize more with people with similar diagnosis, or do you have friends both with and without mental health? Do you want to go first on that one?
Mm. Both with and without. A lot of my workmates don't have any sort of mental health concerns.
Mm.
But like a lot of my close friends have colorful lives and they've lived through a lot of things. And yeah, I find it very nice to hang out with people with all sorts of backgrounds and yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, and for me it was it's same, it's a bit of both. And I think for people, um, there have been people who have been supportive and have been my friends all along. For
Mm.
others, it took a little bit of educating, and especially extended family members. Sometimes there can be a bit of stigma, and which
Yes.
required a bit of educating. Um, and especially, there's a question coming through, and I think it's directed at me. Is OCD part of bipolar? No, it's not. I don't have bipolar. I'm just sharing my lived experience because I have purely OCD, well, OCD anxiety. But I'm not sure whether it is part of bipolar or not, but I don't have bipolar.
Mm.
Um, uh, and so, yeah. What else? Yes, the recording will be shared after this webinar. So if you've registered, you'll receive a link. And also you can follow along on the thread on the forums as well. The other thing is, oh, this is another one that's come through. How does internalized stigma affect you, and has it been a barrier to seeking support? Very good question.
Yeah,
Alice.
that's a nice question. Internalized stigma. I don't know. I've been really lucky that I don't have too much externalized stigma. So the internalized stigma has not really resurfaced.
Mhm.
I was always, very open-minded, and so was my family. So didn't really affect me too much. But I'd like to talk a bit more about stigma. I
Yes.
I had this student because I work in higher education. So one came into my office and we were talking about stigma of mental health, and she said, if I got a diagnosis, it would mean that everyone would have access to it or something like that. And I sort of explained to
Mm,
her privacy and confidentiality, and um, she said, but if you had bipolar, you would have to tell your workplace. And I thought that's so funny because you're speaking to someone with bipolar. But I didn't tell her. I didn't want to put her on the spot, but I thought it was very funny, and it was an opportunity to educate her in that moment.
mm,
So I did that. I said, people with conditions, mental health conditions, can be high functioning. They can go and work through this through therapy or various options, and there are medications available, and it's possible to live quite a baseline life um, with the right support. And yeah, so that was very interesting. But also when I was on the project, I
mm,
found that that was a bit challenging watching the feature, and it was uploaded to YouTube, and there was a comment on the YouTube
mm,
video that said, how is this breaking the stigma? This is only fueling it. And I was
mm,
so annoyed, not only
mm,
at the commenter, but also at the feature, that it didn't portray me as I would have liked. They didn't ask me if I had a job, if I was what they didn't focus on the
mm.
recovery side of it. And so anyway, I told my friend, and a problem shared is a problem halved, and this just proves it, because he went out of his way to make a comment, and
Aw,
English is not his first language, and he wrote this delightful comment just saying like great things, and I thought, wow, this is just a supportive friend, and I feel resolved about the project now. So yeah.
yeah.
And they also did, they may have not got the best reputation, but they did a interview about a lady with split personalities just recently, and it was a very good interview. I think they did learn from that.
That experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
stigma reduction and all of that, it requires a lot of education. I know at
Mm.
SANE we've got the Stigma Watch program that sort of uh, allows, and you can actually anyone can become a volunteer of the Stigma Watch program, where you, if you come across any journal article a news article or a news story that has portrayed mental health in a stigmatizing way, you can actually report it. And what the Stigma Watch team at SANE do is they actually proactively reach out to the journalist and actually educate them. So if any of you want to become a part of that, feel free to do that. It's all the links will be on our website. So yes, for me as well, internalized stigma actually was a significant factor in me reaching out for help because
Okay.
whilst my family is very open and I'm very open-minded, it was actually coming to acceptance, or there must be something more than physical health going on. And I think it was that deep-rooted stigma that exists in the culture that I come from. I come from a culturally diverse background, and over there it's becoming better, but mental health is not talked about, so that was internalized a little bit, and we were all like, oh, you'll be fine, it'll be okay. Every child struggles with it because a lot of my symptoms came out in childhood, but you know we but once we got there and we were open to seeing a psychologist and all of that, it became, that internalized stigma, it flipped the switch for me. So eventually I did need to seek external help and, really break through that internal stigma.
Yeah.
What else? Let me this is a good one. What do you do for or how do you manage being unwell at work? And are you working at the moment, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, I'm working in a higher education institution and I love my job. I am on the wellness team for students, so I support students with mental health and seeking support when needed. And I also help with assessments and stuff like that. So when I'm unwell, I just communicate that it's just like another illness to me. They all know about my condition. They know about the book. They're very supportive and they've written an article about me. So yeah, it's all out in the open and I am pretty lucky. And um, my late manager last year passed away suddenly, and that was huge for me because we were very close. But um, yeah, they were all very supportive, and I did have other issues that I had to battle. Like I feel like my relationship with alcohol worsened at the time, with binge drinking. Um,
Mhm.
but that's simmered down now. And I just had this recent blip with a bit of a depressive lapse recently, and I just
Mm,
took 2 days off work and provided medical certificate, and it was fine. Yeah, I
yeah.
didn't go into details with them either, but mm,
Yeah, I think it will take time, but I think hopefully, I'm a glass half full type of a person, and I have a possibility mindset that, one day society will turn around. We'll all be having, um, open, honest conversations about our mental ill health as we do about physical health. But we've got 2 minutes to go. Um, uh, let's end on, I guess, what's one thing you would like to I want to end on something that, if someone's struggling or going through a tough time at the
mm,
moment, regardless of their diagnosis, diagnosis can put, little blinders in our eyes. Let's take
yeah.
that out of the picture. What's one advice you would give someone who's really, really struggling at the moment?
Oh, just reach out, seek help. Little gestures, manage the minutes. This is what
Mm,
the coach of my football team, Collingwood, lives
mhm,
by. Just manage the moments. Yeah, self-care and be
mm.
kind to yourself.
What does self-care look like for you?
Oh, it's different when depending on how I
Yeah.
am. So you have to think of that. Write a big list of all the things that may bring you joy. Maybe not right now, they're not the right thing, but somewhere along that list, you're going to find something for right now. Maybe it's taking your shoes off and walking in the backyard. That sounded pretty good to me earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Alice, for your time. And thank you to those who've attended, asked those questions. Our thoughts are with people who are struggling right now. It can be difficult. But reach out on our forums. Jinx will pop a link to our forums. So if you need support or need help, the conversation can continue there. Yeah, have a lovely night, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone.